The last part we're going to look at is the impact World War I had on the rest of the world. This is the other big chunk of information that's going to be on your test. The first chunk was the causes of World War I and how the U.S. gets involved. The second half is going to be about the League of Nations and really the post-war period. Right. First thing, Woodrow Wilson, right, he had his own plan for how to end World War I, and he was focused on how can we work together to prevent a future war from happening. Right. So on January 1918, he gave a speech to Congress, which is referred to as his 14-point speech. Now, 14 points is the name for his plan for peace. He listed 14 things that need to be done in order to prevent a future conflict from happening. Right, and here were kind of some of the major parts. Obviously, there are other things, but these kind of related to the causes that we had of World War I to begin with. Right, so take a moment, look them through. Okay, this one dealt with militarism. He wanted smaller military forces. He didn't think nations needed to have large militaries. He wanted an end to the secret treaties and alliances. That was the A. He wanted freedom of the seas. That was because of U-boats. All right, so if I can get, right, the U-boat warfare where the German subs were sinking American ships and also Allied ships. Free trade, being able to trade with whatever country, right, and self-determination. That meant that countries that were previously colonies, they should now be allowed to have their own countries. And the final part, and the most important, obviously you can see from all my stars, was the League of Nations. And this became Woodrow Wilson's really, that was like his big thing. He really wanted to see this organization be created. It was kind of the preview of the United Nations. It was a worldwide peacekeeping organization that would work with conflicting countries to try and come up to a peaceful resolution, kind of like our peer mediating system here in the middle school. And he felt that it would be able to achieve peace without victory, meaning we would be able to keep peace without actually having to use force and have to go to war. Now, the treaty that ends World War I is the Treaty of Versailles. Now, treaties are just named after the locations in which they're signed at, and Versailles was the royal palace outside of Paris. So, Treaty of Versailles is going to end World War I, right? The Allies, okay, the lead nations of the Allied powers, also known as the Big Four, right? The United States, Great Britain, Italy, and France. You'll notice that one country that's not there is Russia, and Russia left before the war was actually over, so they were not part of the delegation, the Allied delegation that was able to come to sign the treaty. Now, here is an important point. Okay, the other three countries, they all wanted to punish Germany. They blamed the fault, the causing of World War I at the doorstep of Germany. They wanted to punish them heavily. Wilson stood apart from the other three because he was focused on how can we learn from this? How can we keep the peace to prevent something like this happening again? But when you look at it, right, these three countries, they have a long history, these three right here, they had a long history of having to deal with Germany, right, throughout the history of Europe. The United States really didn't. So, I mean, you're looking at different perspectives. They're definitely going to feel slightly different than the United States is going to have. So, despite Woodrow Wilson trying his best to focus more on the positives, okay, the Allies pretty much, the three of the Big Four, they got what they wanted. All right, they forced Germany to sign the treaty, which basically made them accept blame all for causing World War I. So accept full blame. They had to give up all the colonies that they had. They had to reduce their military. They had to pay a lot of money. Now back then, I mean today it's a lot of money, but back then it was even more money. They had to pay $33 billion in reparations, meaning that was war payment for damages. And these things are going to, and we'll talk about when we do World War II, but those are going to lay the foundation for Adolf Hitler to come to power in the 1930s. Germany is just going to be devastated by the Treaty of Versailles, and they're going to look to someone to try and restore their fame, restore their might on the world stage. And Wilson was able to push, remember this was his little baby, it's like Gollum in Lord of the Rings with my precious, right? Woodrow Wilson's precious was the League of Nations, and he pushed really hard to have that put into the treaty, which it eventually is going to be put into the treaty. So now we look at how the United States goes about getting involved with the League of Nations. Now, obviously, Woodrow Wilson wanted us involved. Now, the checks and balances system states that the president can sign treaties, but in order for it to be official, the Senate has to ratify. Ratify means to approve, right? And they're going to refuse it. They're not going to want the United States to get themselves involved with the League of Nations, right, for several reasons. One, it was Europe. It wasn't the Western Hemisphere. At this time, we were more focused on what was going on in the Western Hemisphere. And the second reason is it might involve us in future world conflicts, kind of like the alliance system. So I have a picture on the next slide, but look at this picture here. You know this guy's Uncle Sam because he's got the hat, right? And he's got the white hair. This is a bridge. Belgium, France, England, Italy, right? And then if you look at what block's missing, it's called the capstone, right? The arch isn't going to be, the bridge isn't going to be able to work without that missing piece. The missing piece is the United States. So this author was essentially saying that the League of Nations was doomed to fail because the most powerful country in the world was not involved, right? It's not going to work if you don't have that most powerful country, right? And then the other picture, right, is obviously the League of Nations becomes formed without the United States because the Senate doesn't ratify it. But here's the other picture, right? This is kind of what the Senate was afraid of. They were afraid that if the United States got involved, they were now going to be involved in world conflicts, whether they wanted to or not. They'd be forced to have to get involved. All right, and looking at changes that World War I, kind of like looking back on what had happened in the United States, massive social change, all right, going on in the United States. All right, first and foremost, African Americans, they start moving to the north looking for jobs in factories. So that's referred to as the Great Migration, right? When the white males go to fight in World War I because of the draft, somebody has to step up and take those jobs. African Americans who are not happy with life in the South, they're going to jump at the opportunity to come to the north and work. All right, and this is just kind of a famous painting showing you African Americans making this mass movement to the north to cities like Chicago, New York, and St. Louis. The other group that benefited greatly was women. All right, very similar to African Americans, they're going to take up factory jobs. Okay, during the war, they're going to enjoy, right, having that opportunity. So when the men come back, they're going to start looking around for other jobs. And this is important because World War II, it comes back again. Women are going to get involved, support the war effort by going to work in factories. And then these two issues here, the Red Scare and Palmer raids. Okay, this was after the Russian Revolution and communism. Okay, Americans were really scared of a communist revolution in the United States. So this fear of communists, this fear of anarchists and radicals is going to sweep the country, right? And usually the color associated with communism is red, right? So hence that period becomes known as the Red Scare. And then to go along with the Red Scare leads to Palmer raids, which were raids on suspected radicals. Anybody who was suspected to be a communist, they were kind of put on almost a blacklist where people pointed fingers at them, accused them of plotting against the government, threatening to, bring anarchy and communism to the United States. Okay, interesting political cartoon here, right? It shows a communist down here. The dagger says Bolshevism, which was the form of communism in the United States. All right, and then this is a pretty interesting political cartoon showing the fear of anarchy people had in the United States. All right, the knife says Bolshevism. It was the form of communism that was in Russia at this time. And this guy's, he's sneaking around. Okay, he's burning the flag underneath. Anarchy means lack of government, right? And that was kind of the fear that was out there that people had against communists. Right, and then the last part, right? The Red Scare. It was anti-radical, meaning it was against communism or against anybody who took drastic measures against the government, but it was also anti-foreigner, right? Because people associated foreigners with being different and communists being different, radicals being different. They all unfortunately got lumped into the same category. Famous trial at the time, the Sacco and Vanzetti trial, right? They were foreigners who were arrested for murder. Now, there was no evidence that was presented, but they were eventually found guilty, and this is kind of like, unfortunately, the symbol of this anti-foreigner sentiment of the 1920s, where, essentially they were found guilty because they were foreign, because they were immigrants into the United States, right? And then kind of the last, little dark side of World War I is the competition between whites and blacks, okay, in the major northern cities, competing over the available jobs. That's going to lead to some tension in the United States as well.